Okay, in this video I'm going to show you how to add 3D rotation to your rocket with a simple technique. By adding 3D rotation to some elements, you will improve your motion graphics to a super high level animation. So without wasting time, let's get started. First of all, let's go to frame 0. Select transform layer and press the U key to load all keyframed properties, in this case position and Z rotation. I want to bring the rocket object to the center of the composition in frame 0, and as you know, our composition is 1920 in 1080 pixels, so its center is 960 and 540. And now change the Z rotation to 0. Okay, maybe this question has crossed your mind why I created keyframes in frame 0 and not in other frames, for example frame 100. If I change position of this rocket object to 960 and 540 and also I change rotation value to 0, now if I delete these keyframes, my rocket object will not go back to its previous position, and as you can see, my circular path will be destroyed completely. So I prefer to use frame 0. Okay, let's hit Ctrl Z several times. Okay, and now let's go to frame 0 again. Okay, now I want to create a 3D wing layer. Here we have two wing compositions. I don't want this wing left, so let's delete it. Select wing right and hit return key and rename it to wing 1. Now double click on it to open its composition. Let's change the resolution to full. Select this wing layer and turn on the rasterize option. Let's rename the layer to wing center. Okay, now I want to add a null object, so from the menu choose layer, new, null object, rename it to controller. Now from the menu choose effect, effect controls, or press F3. Click on this lock button to hold this panel open while I'm working with other layers. Now let's add a slider to it, so from the menu choose effect, expression controls, a slider control, and rename it to rotation control. Now I need a camera as well because I want to orbit around this wing in this composition. So from the menu choose layer, new, camera, and leave the settings as they are. Okay, as the first step, I want to move the anchor point of this wing object to the bottom. I want to put the anchor point at this position under this corner of the wing. So select the pan behind tool and move the anchor point to this position. Let's zoom in to find the best place. Okay, great. Now let's change the layer color to, for example, blue. Okay, now let's duplicate this layer. So select it and from the menu choose edit, duplicate, or hit Ctrl D. Let's rename it to wing T1 or wing top 1. Change the layer color to yellow. Now duplicate this layer 4 more times to have 5 duplicated layers. Now let's duplicate wing center again. Bring it down. Change the layer color to, for example, purple. And rename it to wing down 1 or wing D1. Now duplicate it 4 more times. And let me rearrange the layers to have wing D1 layer at the top and wing D5 layer at the bottom. Okay. Now I want to add a fill effect to this wing center layer. So from the menu choose effect, generate, fill. I leave its color to red for now. Okay, now for this controller layer, I want to change the slider value to 0.5. Okay, now I want to change the rotation of these yellow layers, but each layer will have its own rotation from the bottom layer minus this slider value. Okay, first of all, let's select all layers by pressing Ctrl A and make all these layers 3D. And now select this wing center layer and all of these yellow layers. Press the R key to load the rotation property. Okay, now to see what I'm doing here, let's switch the camera to custom view 1. Press the C key to change the camera tool and orbit around the objects. Okay, as you can see, all of our layers are placed in a flat plane. I want to add a little bit rotation to each layer to create a 3D look wing. This is one way to create 3D objects in After Effects. As you can see, when I change the X rotation of a layer, it rotates around X axis and this will add a 3D look to our wing. Okay, as I told you before, I want each layer takes its X rotation from the bottom layer and then I want to minus it by the slider value. So hold the Alt key and click on this X rotation of Wing T1 layer. Delete this code, and to connect this X rotation to the bottom layer, click and drag this pick whip icon over the X rotation of the bottom layer. Then type a minus and again drag pick whip icon over the rotation control slider. Now as you can see, wing center X rotation is 0 and the rotation of wing T1 is 0 minus the slider value, which is 0.5. So it will be negative 0.5 degrees. If I zoom in a little bit in composition window, you can see that wing T1 is rotated negative 0.5 degrees. And if I change the slider value, its rotation will be changed. As a quick tip, if you want to change a slider value with small numbers, hold the Ctrl key and click and drag over the slider number. And if you want to change a slider value with large numbers, hold the Shift key and click and drag over the slider number. Okay, let's change the slider value to 0.5 again. Now let's follow the same process for the other yellow layers. So hold the Alt key and click on X rotation of wing T2 and delete this code. And drag this pick whip icon over the X rotation of the bottom layer, which is wing T1. Add a minus sign and drag pick whip icon over the slider value. Now as you can see, X rotation of wing T2 is 0.5 degrees less than wing T1 X rotation. So it will be negative 1 degree. In fact, each layer is 0.5 degrees different from the previous layer. Okay, let's continue the process. Connect the X rotation of wing T3 to wing T2 and add a minus and drag the pick whip icon over the slider. Okay, repeat the same process for the wing T4 and wing T5. Okay, great. Let's see what we have now in composition window. Great. As you can see, we have 5 duplicated layers that each layer is rotated 0.5 degrees relative to the previous layer. Okay, now I want to repeat the same process for purple layers, but this time I want these layers to be here on the other side of the red wing center object. So make sure you have selected these purple and wing center layers and then press the R key. And now I start from wing down 1 layer. This time I want the X rotation of this layer to be as much as the amount of X rotation of the top layer plus this slider value. So hold the Alt key and click on the stopwatch, delete this code and connect its X rotation to the X rotation of the top layer to have the same rotation value, and then I want to add 0.5 degrees to it. So we have to add a plus sign and then drag this pick whip icon over the slider. Now as you can see, we have this wing D1 layer here at the other side of the red layer with 0.5 degrees rotation. Okay, let's repeat the same process for the other wing down layers. Connect X rotation of wing D2 to X rotation of the top layer. Delete the code, add a plus sign, and click and drag the pick whip icon over the slider. Okay, here we can see these layers rotated to create a 3D wing shape. And finally connect the wing D5 to wing D4. Okay, let's see the result in composition window. Okay, good. As you can see, our 10 layers are beside the wing center layer to form our 3D wing shape. Here you can increase the slider value, for example to number 1. And here we have a thicker 3D wing with more distance or rotation between each layer. Or you can decrease the slider value to have a thinner 3D wing. It's up to you. Okay, let's set it to 0.5 again. Okay, great. This is a good result so far. But if you look closer, you can see that all of the top corners of these layers are in the same line. But I want to add a little bit a smooth edge to the top of the wing shape. To do this, I'm going to use the scale property. Although this process is not necessary, but I suggest you to do it and add more details to your objects, and this will improve your motion graphics production quality in final render. Okay, let me show you how to do it properly. Select Wing Center and all top yellow layers. Press the S key to load the scale property. Deselect the layers. Okay, our wing center layer should be at 100% scale, but let's rescale other layers. So for wing T1, change the scale value to 98%. As you can see, each layer will be scaled from this bottom corner because we have placed the anchor point in this position. For wing T2, enter 2 units smaller, I mean 96%. For wing T3, again enter 2 units smaller than previous layer, I mean 94%. For wing T4, enter 92%. And finally, for wing T5, enter 90%. Okay, as I don't want to scale these layers in X-axis, so let's hide these scale chain buttons for all layers and change X scale for these layers to 100%. Of course, it's up to you. Now they have 100% scale in X-axis. Okay, now let's repeat the same process for these bottom purple layers. Select them, press the S key, and change the scale from 98% to 90% from the top to the bottom. Hide these chains to unlock the scale axis to be able to change each scale value separately. And finally, change the scale X value to 100% again. Okay, let's see what we have here. Yes, as you can see, we have good soft edges on both sides of this wing center object. Let's hide this camera and controller layer to see more clearly. Okay, great. Don't forget that if you create more layers on each side, for example 10 layers on the left and 10 layers on the right, you will get a more accurate 3D object. So I suggest you to add more layers with a smaller distance or rotation between them to create a nice and believable 3D objects. Okay, now I want to go one step further. I want to use colors to add more 3D look to the edge of this wing shape. So I'm going to use some colors to create a soft gradient look for the top edge of the wing. In fact, we are going to create something like highlight effect at the top edge of the wing, so your 3D wing objects look more real in the scene. Okay, let's see how we can do it. Let's change the fill color of the wing center object. So let's change it to F6, F6, F6. So the middle layer is almost white now. Now let's add a color to wing T1 using a fill effect. And for this layer, let's enter this code, D9, 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 a bright gray color. And if I zoom in here, you can see that I'm going to create a gradient effect from the center layer to the next 2 or 3 layers. Now let's add a fill effect to wing T2. And for this one, let's add this color, CF, CF, CF. Okay, great. Here you can see a nice gradient effect that will create a highlight effect at the top edge of the wing. Okay, now let's apply these fill effects to the other side. So select wing T1, copy the fill effect into memory. Now select the wing D1 layer that is on the other side of the wing center layer and paste the fill effect. Now copy the fill effect of wing T2 and paste it over wing D2 layer. Okay, we have successfully created our 3D wing shape with a nice smooth and highlight effect at the top edge. If you want to have more curve shape and highlight effect, you can add more fill effects to wing T3 and wing T4 layers and change their colors to have a nice gradient effect at the top edge of the wing. Okay, now we can go back to our main animate composition. Okay, now I want to duplicate this wing 1 composition 3 times to have 4 wings and to have a wing on each side. First of all, let's move its anchor point to the center of the rocket shape, which is the center of the composition as well. Because if you remember, I moved the rocket layer to 960 and 540 position. To have a visual reference for the center of the composition, let's show the ruler and add a vertical line and 960 position. So, from the menu choose View, Show Rulers, or press Ctrl R. Now let's zoom in a little bit and change the resolution to full. Okay, make sure you have Info panel here. If you can't see it, from the menu choose Window, Info, or press Ctrl 2. Okay, now click and drag from the left vertical ruler to the center of the composition until you see 960 number in X value of your info panel. Okay, my line is at the center now. Okay, now I want to move the anchor point of the wing shape to the center of the rocket. So, activate Pan Behind tool and move the anchor point in X-axis until you get to this blue line. Zoom in to make sure your vertical green axis, which is the Y-axis, is exactly over the blue ruler line. Okay, great. Now duplicate wing 1 layer 3 times, so from the menu choose Edit, Duplicate, or press Ctrl D. Now let's rotate these wing layers, so select them and press the R key. For wing 1, leave the Y rotation value at 0. For wing 2, change the Y rotation value to 90. Set the Y rotation of wing 3 to 180. And finally, for wing 4, enter 270. Okay, now we have 4 wings and 1 wing on each side. Okay, to see where these wings are on the real 3D composition, let's select the body composition and let's switch the camera to custom view 1. And now let's pan and orbit around the rocket shape. As you can see, these 4 wings are around the rocket object. If we switch to the top view, this is our body layer. Let's change its color. Our body object is here. And these 4 wings are placed around the body object, and we will rotate them around this body object to simulate the rotation of the rocket. Okay, great. To be able to rotate all 4 wings together, I'm going to parent wing 2, 3, and 4 to wing 1 layer. So, activate Parent and Link column. Select these 3 wing layers and parent them to wing 1 layer. Now let's go back to active camera view. And if I rotate wing 1 layer in Y-axis, as you can see, other 3 layers will rotate as well. Okay, for these rocket compositions, I mean highlight, body gradient, windows, and body compositions, don't forget to turn off these rasterize buttons. If they are on, as you can see, we will not have the correct result for the wing layers. In fact, our wings, which is in front of the body layer, will be hidden. So, make sure that rasterize option is off for these compositions. Okay, now let's rotate wing 1 a little bit to check it. Yes, as you can see, when a wing is in front of the body, we can see it, and when it's behind the body, we can't see it. Great. Okay, now let's drag all wing layers and put them at the top of the rocket compositions. So, they have to be at the top of the highlights composition. Let's rotate wing 1 a little bit. As you can see, our wings don't have any thickness. To solve this problem, we should turn on rasterize button for these 4 wing layers. Now if I rotate it a little bit more, here you can see the thickness and the highlight at the top edge of the wing layer, and this adds more 3D sense to our object. Okay, great. Let's change the rotation of wing 1 to 0 again. Okay, now I want to rotate these windows around the body as well, so select the windows composition, and I move it to the edge of the body shape. Let's check it. Yes, it's located exactly on the edge of the body. Now let's rotate it around the Y-axis 90 degrees. Okay, now I want to move the anchor point of this composition to the center of the body or to the center of the composition. So, use the Pan Behind tool and move the anchor point to the center. And place the green Y-axis exactly on the blue line of the ruler. Why did I do that? Because I want to rotate this Windows composition around the center of the body shape. Now let's rotate the Windows composition. Okay, as you can see, we have a problem here. I want to cut this Windows layer from the edge of the body composition. So to solve this problem, let's duplicate body composition, rename it to body mask, put it at the top of the Windows composition, and let's change its layer color to, for example, to orange. And now click on this toggle switch modes button. And for Windows composition in track matte column, choose alpha matte. Now, as you can see, only that part of the Windows composition is visible that is inside this body mask layer. And so my Windows layer is cut from the edge of the body shape. Okay, great. Let's hide these two columns and click on this small button down here. Okay, now let's rotate Windows layer to 0. And to bring this big window position exactly above this wing, let's rotate Windows composition a little bit, maybe around -10 degrees. And it's not bad to lower it a little. Okay, awesome. Now if I rotate my wings, as you can see, Windows layer does not rotate. How to solve it? Yes, we have to parent the Windows composition to Wing 1 composition. Now if I rotate the Wing 1 layer, we can see that Windows composition will rotate as well. Great. Okay, now if I rotate Wing 1 to, for example, 50 degrees, as you can see, our Windows composition covers this highlight effect, because this Windows composition is not in the same Z position as the highlight composition. If you remember, we have changed the anchor point of the Windows layer and we rotate it, so Z position of this layer is not at 0 value anymore. So, Windows composition is in front of the highlight composition. To solve this problem, select the highlight composition, press the P key, and change the Z position a little bit until you can see it in the front of the Windows layer. Maybe -90 is a good value. Okay, now you can see this highlight at the top of the Windows composition, and it improves your motion graphics level a little bit more. Okay, we have worked on Windows, wings, and highlights. Now it's time to work on rotating the wings and windows. So, select Transform Layer, press the U key, and we don't need these two keyframes at frame 0, so let's delete them. So the rocket returns to its first position. Okay, now as you can see, the only thing that we need to do is adding the rotation to the wings and windows composition. And the only object that we need to rotate is Wing 1. Because as you know, other wing layers and also Windows layer are parented to the Wing 1 composition. So select Wing 1 and open Rotation Property. Now I want to animate it in Y-axis. So let's go to frame, for example, 30. Change the Y rotation value to 0 and set a keyframe. Now let's go to frame, for example, here in frame 110. And let's rotate it. A full 360 degrees and even more, maybe 180 degrees. Let's scrub to see the rotation. Okay. Okay, now let's go to frame around 210 and let's reverse the rotation. So change the first parameter to 0 and for this one enter 10 degrees. And finally let's go to frame 250 and let's increase it again to have 2 full rotations and 180 degrees. Okay, great. When I create a ramp preview, you will see the result. For now, select these 3 keyframes and convert them to Easy Ease. Now select the Y rotation property and in Graph Editor. Now here you can create overshoot as well. So select Convert Vertex tool and click once and then click and drag to adjust the handle angle and make an overshoot after this keyframe. And you can change the handle angle for the next keyframe as well. And finally, let's modify this handle for the last keyframe. Okay, great. We have completed the rotation animation as well. Okay, now let's see a ramp preview. Great. Awesome. I'm satisfied with the result. Okay, you learned how to create a 3D rotation to simulate 3D objects in the scene with a few simple techniques. You can work more to find more advanced and complex ways to create 3D motion graphics in After Effects. Okay, before we finish this video, let's add a few more modifications to the scene. I think it's not bad to bring down this rocket path a little bit, so select Transform Layer, and then select all position keyframes. And using the selection tool, move this animation path to the bottom a little bit. Okay, or even more. Okay, great. We can lower cloud's layers a little bit, so let's select Cloud 4 and press the P key. If I move this layer here in this frame, After Effects creates a keyframe for this position, which I don't want it. So let's delete this keyframe. Click on the position property, and if I move it, After Effects will create a keyframe at this frame again. I don't want it also, so let's delete it again. So let's select keyframes and move timeline indicator to a frame that we have a keyframe, for example frame 0 or frame 300, and then lower the layer. Okay, repeat the same process for Cloud 1 and even for Cloud 2 and Cloud 3. Okay, great. I think it's a good idea to copy shadow effect from the Cloud 2 to Cloud 3. Okay, now we have a shadow effect for Cloud 3 and it will add more 3D sense to our scene. Okay, let's scrub in timeline to find which part needs to be corrected. I think it's better to change and increase the fire scale in this frame. So, in frame 210, let's change fire scale to 2.5. And I think we need to move these line shapes a little bit. They are not aligned with the body of the rocket. So, select all line shapes and move them to find the best position. Maybe it's a good idea to offset them a little bit, so select them and move the layers in timeline to find the best frame, and move them to the left to see them a little bit sooner. Great, I think it's okay now. Okay, we finished the project together, so let's see a ramp preview. Okay, awesome. Nice result. Okay, I hope you have enjoyed watching this course so far, and I hope you have learned lots of tips, tricks, and techniques in Adobe After Effects and Adobe Illustrator. In the next video, I'm going to show you how to render these motion graphics, so you can publish your final video on the internet and let other people enjoy your engaging motion graphics. So don't miss the next video. Thanks for watching and see you soon.